You're watching a special edition of Agenda where we're in conversation with author Aatish Taseer, whose book, The Way Things Were, has just come out on paperback. It's also, there's a lot of buzz. A lot of people are putting on the list of the books to read for 2015. Congratulations about the award at the Bangalore Lit Fest.
Thank you.
You know, it's an interesting time to be a writer in India because there's been so much of the award wapsi and so much of the intolerance debate. You were away, of course, for most of that, but
For some of it.
For some of it, yeah. So, but what did you think about all that was happening when you're living in New York? So what did it look like?
It looked very bad from a distance. It looked very bad from a distance, but that doesn't mean that it is as bad as it is. I do think that after Dadri, the Prime Minister's silence was pretty shameful. And it created a space, when he didn't speak, it created a space where civil society or journalism had to step in. I mean, you were basically saying, if there isn't a pushback from the society, then this thing would go unnoticed or unremarked on. So he did it kind of invite a reaction. Now, obviously, like, we know that there's an opportunism involved. We know that some of the people who were leading the protest would never have wanted him to be Prime Minister. So, of course, these things, then they can then snowball and become like almost an attempt to derail a democratically elected government or stop it from functioning. So the thing can get way out of hand. But at that point, I was very proud that the Indian reaction was so strong. You know, it made you feel that you can't really mess with this country on certain.
Was it also the first kind of time that usually writers are accused of being away in their, in their ivory towers, or writing away? Was it also in a long time writers getting involved in a political movement, making a political comment about something, engaging with something that is happening right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that there's a wonderful book, in fact, that Shwapan Das Gupta put me onto by I think Shills, and it talks about how the Indian intellectual has always been afraid for almost like 100 years of being too aloof, of not engaging with the political reality and of feeling deracinated, feeling irrelevant. And I'm sure at that point writers must have felt deeply relevant, But I mean, it's the job of a writer to be engaged, especially in a country like India. You have no business being too good for politics.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this because I was watching there was a debate marking the Constitution and the anniversary of the Constitution. And in that debate, obviously, the opposition took up the whole intolerance thing about how the rationalist murders and what's been happening recently. And the government threw back at them the whole emergency period. Now, I thought it's interesting to talk to you about it because in your book, which is about, for all our viewers who haven't read it, it's about a couple and, their love and their relationship, and it kind of spans through time, going back to where,
begins with the emergency.
Yeah, emergency, and then Babri Masjid and all, so and it seemed to be emergency versus what's happening now, which is worse. So there was but where do you stand on that?
It's just not, I mean, the emergency is 25 years, 35 years, how long ago?
30, yeah.
It's just not, I mean, nobody, like, India is one of the youngest countries in the world. Most people haven't even lived through the emergency. So it seems like I mean, you can't excuse yourself from criticism in a present moment and say it was so much worse in 1975.
Right. It's
just it's not a way to carry out an argument. It just the emergency. I believe that there's a certain kind of historical curiosity that's emerged about it, which is very good. The emergency was a very bad time, and Indians are more aware of it than ever before. Like, for a long time there was a kind of silence that fell over it, like it fell over 84. All that is being probed, all that is alive in very interesting ways, but it's not a way for the government to get out of its responsibilities. It just doesn't work like that.
And why I think it's interesting as well, because I think I read somewhere that you were quite appreciative of Narendra Modi.
I don't like it when people say that. Firstly, because it's a very small way to look at my work. Like, okay. I feel that I was covering that election, and it was a very powerful, very moving mandate. And people like Pankaj Misra, like Willie Dalrymple, were reporting it in the West like it was the coming of Adolf Hitler in 1933.
Okay.
Now, there has to be some connection between the reality on the ground in a place where people are voting for all the right reasons, and people would come up and they'd say, "जी मंदिर के बारे में बताएं," and say, "आप मंदिर के बारे में क्यों पूछ रहे हैं? हम विकास के लिए नहीं चुन रहे हैं." And so there was a real gap between how that election was reported, even in Delhi, and the actual reality in places like Banaras. So what I felt as a reporter at that time was to capture the truth of that, the hopefulness of that election. Now that's quite different from
being
saying
a Modi fan.
that I'm a Modi supporter or I support the BJP.
Okay.
I did feel that there was a kind of inevitability, like the country had been brought to a certain moment of despair, and this man represented a very real hope. And having said that, once you move into the period of the person actually being in power and there being a government, one returns to one's adversarial position, you know.
Yeah.
One doesn't just stay like a kind of empty-headed supporter.
Yeah. So, which you weren't, obviously.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you both.
I hope that's like really clear now,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it? Good.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you. You brought up Banaras. Now you've been spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, I'm in fact on my way there next week for 6 weeks.
You're okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been there?
I was there during the election for about 5 to 6 weeks, and now I'm going
Oh,
again.
was that your first trip?
I've been going over
because
the
this
years.
book talks a lot about Sanskrit. So I heard a rumor that you were staying in Banaras and learning Sanskrit and all of that, and that's how this book became so much about Sanskrit as well. Is that true?
No, actually my Sanskrit education had happened like very much in the West, very much. I mean, you'd be surprised to know that the real centers of Sanskrit ever for the last almost 100 years have been in Western Europe and America. Like that's where some of the most dynamic scholarship is happening. That's where some of the best books about Indic thought are being written, about Indic art. So actually my education in Sanskrit has almost exclusively happened in foreign universities.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen to write the book. It happened because of a real curiosity to have a kind of an image of ancient India, to be near the past in some ways, which the kind of education we receive in India, it's almost systematically designed to veer you away from it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's all around you. If you wanted it, you could have it. But the way that you kind of come into a certain kind of English-speaking world in India, you're designed to sort of treat it as not really very important, you know?
That's actually what the HRD ministry, that's what a lot of people are saying right now in the government as well. In fact, that's what Smriti Irani talked about as well when she received a lot of criticism for taking away German and installing, bringing back Sanskrit as well. But do you think that's really fair? Because, I mean, aren't you then, writing off the aspirations of a lot of people who, unlike, people like you, maybe people like me, have been lucky enough to receive an English education?
Look, there's no way that you cannot recognize that you were colonized, that a colonial education was given to you to produce a certain kind of person who held his own things with a kind of contempt, and who like hungered after European and American culture in ways that are embarrassing. Like that education did exist. I believe like it has to be revised. It perhaps even has to be dismantled, and especially the English education in the humanities has to be rethought. It's I remember that moment even in the Catherine Boo book, where there's a girl in a slum in Bombay by-hearting her way through Virginia Woolf, and you think it's an absurdity, and the people are very aspirational in other parts of the country.
So they should be learning Virginia Woolf.
No, it's just you have to think about what it is that you want in an Indian context for people to know. Do you want them to know this very grand Sanskritic tradition onto which they might add Mir and Ghalib if they want?
Okay.
They might add medieval Telugu literature. They may the fact is that the question of education, especially in the area of humanities, has to be rethought. I feel that a certain kind of bilingualism or even trilingualism is our real inheritance, and I think that I've seen certain systems of education in places like Japan where they've remade their education to absolutely keep a place for English, but to put Indic learning at the center of the humanities. And
we don't have that, you think?
not at all.
Really?
I think you
Do you all think that there's too much emphasis on English?
No, not that much.
No. See,
No, not that much.
you think there should be more?
Well, let me ask
Yeah.
you the question this way. How many of you, for instance, would be familiar with the commentarial tradition of people like Malinatha or Ramarshi? How many of people would be comfortable with Mahakavya, for instance? How many people would feel that they grew up with this stuff in their bones? Would you say that they did?
But no, that's
No.
true. You're
Isn't
right
that a
there.
strange
no, that's,
thing?
That's, right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
That's right.
The modern Indian, in my opinion, not just if he was fully admitted into the world of English, it would be one thing. Most people, I would say, is that log bezaban ho gaye hain. You know, there's
For
no
sure. I understand what you're
it's not as if Hindi or Urdu or any of those languages are there properly, but English is there brokenly as
But
well.
Aatish,
You know.
how does one bring a balance?
What do we propose? Most of the country still speaks its languages. So are you talking about 600 and 700 million people are going to be moved into this world of like half English? Like what? It would be like nothing the world has ever seen.
But
I mean, is that what you're proposing?
No, I'm not proposing anything. I'm just saying, I'm just pointing out that even Nitish Kumar, part of his selling point in the Bihar campaign was saying that the children in elementary education can study. I want them to have access to English. Now, is he wrong when he said that? And that was a selling point, right? People saw him as a modern politician for
You're
that.
making it seem as if English doesn't stand for power and privilege. If English was simply another language, like it is in Western Europe, to like a language to help you to facilitate the modern world, that would be one thing.
Yeah.
In this country, it is a symbol of power. It's almost a class. It's used by a whole class of people to like look down on Indian learning, on people who are in their languages. You're not accepting that there's a real tension around this subject, and it's that
Tension between the ones who can speak and the ones who can't, right?
Absolutely.
But do you think that some people have suggested that if we take away the focus from learning English, that we might lose the edge to China, which is what we are usually doing?
Firstly, China has lots of edge without English, and South Korea has even more edge without English.
Yeah.
No country that I know of has ever not succeeded because it didn't know English.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, many more questions for Aatish Taseer. Stay tuned for that.